Grace and peace to you from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ, who gave himself for our sins to rescue us from this present evil age. We'll give our consideration to Jesus' parable in Luke chapter 20. Jesus went on to tell the people this parable. A man planted a vineyard, rented it to some farmers, and went away for a long time. At harvest time, he sent a servant to the tenants, so they would give him some of the fruit of the vineyard. But the tenants beat him and sent him away empty-handed. He sent another servant, but that one also they beat and treated shamefully and sent away empty-handed. He sent still a third, and they wounded him and threw him out. Then the owner of the vineyard said, "What shall I do? I will send my son, whom I love. Perhaps they will respect him." But when the tenants saw him, they talked the matter over. "This is the heir," they said. "Let's kill him, and the inheritance will be ours." So they threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. What then will the owner of the vineyard do to them? He will come and kill those tenants and give the vineyard to others. When the people heard this, they said, "May this never be." Jesus looked directly at them and asked, "Then what is the meaning of that which is written? The stone the builders rejected has become the capstone. Everyone who falls on that stone will be broken to pieces, but he on whom it falls will be crushed." The teachers of the law and chief priests looked for a way to arrest him immediately, because they knew he had spoken this parable against them, but they were afraid of the people. This is the gospel of our Lord. Dear brothers and sisters, last Sunday we heard a parable from earlier in Luke where a son essentially said to his dad, "I don't love you, I just want your stuff. So give me my share of the estate." And then once he had the money in his pockets, left home, squandered the wealth in wild living. But then just a little bit later in the parable, we discovered that his obedient older brother was just as bad. Remember his reaction when his rock little brother came home and his father welcomed him with open, forgiving arms? He was outraged. He tells his dad, "All these years I've been slaving for you, and you never gave me what I was really after." He was no different from his younger brother. Neither one of them loved their dad. Both of them were after his stuff. The only difference was the strategy. Today, Jesus explores that same attitude in a different way. The difference is that in this parable, the characters who have that attitude are just further along the road to self-destruction. There's tenants who they want the vineyard, so they can't stand the owner of the vineyard. For like a present day example, I think of a family that owns a beach house and they want to generate some revenue for them when they're not using it. So they hire on their next door neighbors at the beach to kind of be their local agents, to rent it out to tourists, take care of it while they're not there. And the arrangement seems to be working out pretty well to begin with. Except after a while they stop calling. They don't return any messages. So the family sends somebody there to check it out in person and sees, well, the beach house is still there, the neighbors are still there, but they won't let them inside. Like as if it's their house. They give them a kick in the ribs and they tell them to shove off. And the owners of the house are thinking, well, there must be some misunderstanding here. So they send another messenger, same reaction. This one, they punch in the face and tell him never to come back again if he knows what's good for them. Try it a third time. That one ends up in the hospital. So it's kind of becoming clearer what's going on. It's starting to get personal here. So the owner of the house, the father of the family, thinks to himself, well, maybe one of our own needs to go in order to diffuse the tension. Perhaps they will respect my son. And you can see it coming before he even gets there. Except it's even worse than you'd think. They see the son coming, and because they hate the master so much, they decide that they're going to kill him, and that'll show that family who this vineyard belongs to. That'll show them who's boss. And it doesn't take a genius to figure out how this is going to turn out. And I mean turn out for the neighbors who hijacked the house, or translating back over to the parable. How things are going to turn out for the tenants who hijacked the vineyard. How they ever could have expected to get away with this. They're completely delusional. It makes absolutely no sense. And that's exactly what Jesus was looking for a reaction to this. Jesus was telling the parable to get people thinking about themselves in that same situation. The power of parables is that it shows us something from the outside so that we can see things more clearly from the inside. And with this one, Jesus gets us thinking about who our lives belong to and who we're living for, and how completely disastrous it's going to turn out if we're delusional and deny the obvious. The setting of the story was tailored for Jesus' original audience, the vineyard. In the Old Testament, God would refer to his chosen people, Israel, as his vineyard, and the religious leaders were the tenants who were to take care of the vineyard, but the tenants kept on thinking that they owned the vineyard. So God would send prophets to tell them who the vineyard really belonged to, but the more prophets God sent, the more intense the rejection became. Now the last prophet's there. God's Son, whom he loved, is standing in front of them. And here's where the parable intersects with the present moment when Jesus is telling the story. Perhaps they will respect my son. But yeah, right. Good Friday is just a couple days away. The religious leaders are about to kill the son under the delusion that by killing him, they're somehow going to win. And then when Jesus tells them how disastrously this is going to turn out for them, you notice their reaction? They just wanted to kill him even more. So the setting was tailored for Jesus' original audience, with the vineyard and all of that. But once Jesus finishes that parable and gets to the warning, then the language changes. It becomes totally inclusive, universal language that includes everybody, including us. Jesus says, the stone the builders rejected has become the capstone, and everyone who falls on that stone will be broken to pieces, and whomever it falls on will be crushed. Jesus is showing us something from the outside so that we can see things more clearly from the inside. And what he wants us to be thinking about is who our lives belong to and who we're living for and the tragedy that awaits if we refuse to believe that obvious answer. We're tenants too. And the vineyards entrusted to us are the sum total of all of the responsibilities that God has given to us. When you roll out of bed each morning, you're standing in God's vineyard. It's all God's vineyard. Everywhere you go, you're surrounded by opportunities to do what God has given you to do. In this parable, it doesn't so much concentrate on the specifics, like how we're treating our neighbor and managing our possessions, how we're honoring marriage and respecting authority. What this parable concentrates on is something that's deeper than all those things. Jesus takes us all the way down to the foundation. who am I living for? Who does my life belong to? Because if we don't have that straight, if we don't have that foundation, there's nothing to build real obedience on. But it's easy, right? Who does my life belong to? I believe in one God, the Father, the Almighty, and in one Lord, Jesus Christ, and in the Holy Spirit, the Lord, the giver of life. Elementary Christianity. But aren't those the kind of words that roll so easily off the tongue, as long as nobody presses us on the issue? I belong to God, and I live to serve Him. But it's amazing how I can say that and then turn around and look at the vineyard that God has entrusted to me, and perhaps without even realizing the glaring contradiction, purely out of instinct and habit, I look at it all and I just blindly assume it's all mine. It's for me. Kind of as if we're the owners and God's the tenant who owes us fruit from our vineyard. But what if God kept on sending us messengers to remind us of what the arrangement actually is, and to ask us to answer for the glaring contradiction between the confession of my lips and the motives of my heart? Because if God is the foundation of my life and my reason for living, that turns everything upside down. Then I'm no longer the captain of my own ship. Then I cannot operate as if the goal of my life is to make myself as happy as possible, to take care of myself, and after I've done that, to take care of others if I want to. And perhaps the worst realization of all, that if God is the foundation of my life, and everything I'm to do is for Him, then that means realizing that I haven't lived up to the arrangement God has made. How can a narcissist cope with the realization that he's living in God's vineyard? Really, how does a narcissist do that? The tenants do it by covering their ears to messengers and abusing them and throwing them out and doing all of it under the delusion that somehow that's going to change what the reality is, even to the point of their own self-destruction. And when Jesus warns them about the impending self-destruction, they just double down. They just double down. They want to kill Him even more. It's weird. They're not afraid of God, but they're afraid of people. But the tenants aren't the only ones in this parable who are acting contrary to clear reason. The owner of the vineyard, he doesn't seem to be using his head either. They beat up his first servant, and then they treat the second servant even worse, and then they treat the third servant even worse. Why in the world does he think that they're going to respect his son? Perhaps they won't respect my son. Really? I think the reason Jesus tells the story this way and portrays the owner like this is to demonstrate how irrational it would seem that God would send His Son to reason with people who have been rejecting Him and His prophets ever more intensely for 1,000 years. It seems totally irrational. When God sent Jesus, He knew they would reject Him. And Jesus knew what He was getting Himself into. God's goal in sending his Son was to die for the people who hated him. And 3 days after Jesus tells them this parable, they get what they wanted. And those very same teachers of the law and chief priests that were listening to the parable are wagging their fingers at Jesus on the cross, challenging him to come down if he really is who he says he is. And then more irrationality. Jesus doesn't come down. Didn't come down until he paid the price for the crimes against God and against the prophets and against him. Isn't that something to get you thinking? When they crucified Jesus, Jesus was paying for their sins of crucifying him. Jesus wraps it up with a construction metaphor. The stone the builders rejected has become the capstone. When they rejected and killed Jesus, he became their only hope for life. Their only hope, the stone that holds the building together, the foundation without which everything crumbles. And if they would continue to reject that stone, Jesus tells them, it would be to their own destruction. Because that same stone that holds a building together, that same stone can kill a person. There's a Jewish proverb that says basically the same thing. It says, if a stone falls on a pot, the stone wins. And if a pot falls on a stone, the stone wins. Either way, the stone wins. Even days before they kill him, Jesus wants them to think about whether they're going to keep on fighting against him to their own destruction, or whether they're going to put their confidence in him and build their lives on him. He warns the people who despise him because he loves them. And he doesn't want them to be broken to pieces or shattered. And he loves you too. That's why he warns you too. Jesus wants you to look at your heart and think about what you've been living for, who you belong to. Because he wants you to see him as the stone that's your only hope. He wants you to see that long before you ever loved him, he died for you. And even when you still hated him, he claimed you as his own and established himself as the unshakable foundation in your life. What's your source of life? That you've lived for Jesus? That Jesus lived for you. That Jesus died for you. He's a stone. And stones can do two things. They can be your foundation, or they can crush you. Jesus cries out in love. Stand on me. Don't fight against me. I lived for you. I died for you. And I've set you in God's vision. That you, Jesus says, can live for me. Amen.